So tuia ke runga, tuia ke raro, tuia ke waho, tuia ke roto, tuia ke te haere tangata, ka runga te pō, ka runga te ao, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. So thank you everybody for being here this evening. It's really great to see so many people online. So just start with an outline of what we're going to talk about tonight. So first of all, we're going to talk about the purpose of an activity management plan, and you'll see in brackets I put AMP or AMP, because that's what we call it for short. So if I'm referring to an AMP, it means an activity management plan. We're going to talk about the different sections of an AMP. We're going to go through how to identify risks and hazards and put management strategies in place, how to write an AMP, sign-off, review and continuous improvement. And then, as I said before, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A as well. So that's the rough outline that we're going to go through today. And it is an hour session, so we'll get you guys off by 7:30 as quickly as possible. All right, so what we'll do is we'll start with what is the purpose of an activity management plan. So what I want you to do is just have a chat amongst yourselves. I know a lot of you are on site with a group. Have a chat and think, what do you think is the purpose of an AMP? And then just throw some ideas in the chat. So have a chat. What is the purpose of an activity management plan? And then just throw some ideas in the chat around why do you think we have activity management plans? What's their purpose? Cool. Pinehaven said to identify hazards and keep children safe, also for liability. Yep. Tasha said keeping people safe. Absolutely. So you are getting on the right track. It's about keeping people safe, keeping staff, participants, people using our programs safe. Absolutely. So you're absolutely. Sorry, I clicked the thing, we've gone backwards. So yeah, absolutely right. It's about health and safety. So an activity management plan is one of the components of our health and safety system. So we have health and safety system here at the Y, which is around keeping our programs, our staff, our visitors, our participants safe. And that includes our policies, procedures, our forms, documents, health and safety committee, all those are components of a health and safety system. An activity management plan is one of those components to make sure that that system is working properly. So an activity management plan is a plan for how we are going to manage either an activity and or an activity site. So you might have your plan or day plan, your lesson plan of how that activity is going to run, talks to you about your resources, the timing of the activity you're running. But an activity management plan is the health and safety side of it. It's the health and safety plan for how you're going to manage an activity and or an activity site. So you might be doing a walking group with some members at the gym, or you might be running a holiday program activity or any number of activity, and the activity management plan is there for how you're going to manage your activity and or your activity site. So the activity management plan identifies what the risks and hazards are for an activity or site. It identifies strategies to then manage those risks and hazards. So those risks and hazards can be eliminated. So that is the hazard and the risk is gone, it's not there anymore, or it's minimized. So it reduces the severity of that risk or hazard. An activity management plan also is a plan for how to respond in an emergency. So if we did have an emergency while doing an activity or while we're on site, what's our plan for how we're going to respond to it? It also ensures that we have consistency in activity management across staff. So all staff within the site, within the activity, are managing the risks and hazards, managing those strategies in the same way. And above all, it helps to ensure that our programs are safe so that everyone can go home safely. And that's the main aim of health and safety. We want everybody, our staff, our visitors, participants, to be able to go home safe at the end of the day. So having activity management plans as part of our health and safety system means we can run those awesome programs that we're known for and make sure that we're safe. Our young people, our participants can come along and do those really fun activities that challenge them. You know, when we're on site, they can climb trees, go out and do those challenging activities, but we've got a framework around them to make sure that they are kept safe and that they're going home safe at the end of the day. So let's look at what an activity management plan looks like. So this is page 1 of an activity management plan. So in the round circle there, in the red one, is all the information about the activity or the site. And we'll zoom into that and look at that a little bit closer on the next page. And then in the blue is the really meaty stuff. So that's where we put what all the hazards are, the risks, severity, potential, how we're going to manage hazards and risks, and what the result is once we've put management strategies in place. And we're going to go through that section a little bit further on in this training. And then down the bottom in the green on the left is the key for working out the severity and potential of a risk or hazard. So severity is a scale from 1 to 10, and it's the same scale that we use when we do an incident report. So if you want to see a copy of the severity scale, it's linked into the incident report form on the intranet, and it goes from 1 being the lowest severity up to 10. Beside that, we have the potential. So potential is how likely is a risk or hazard going to occur. So it can have low potential, medium, or high. So we might have something that if it was to happen, it's a high severity, but it's got a really low potential, or vice versa. So something might have a really high potential of happening, but the severity is really low, and also different in between as well. Then in the green on the right-hand side is the key for the result. So once we've put our management strategies in place, the result is either E, we've eliminated that hazard, or M, we've minimized that hazard. So let's zoom into that top part of the activity management plan and look at all the different components of it. So here is all the information that we put in about the activity and or our activity site. And there's a few reasons that we have this here. So an activity management plan has to get approved before an activity can take place. So this information tells the approver all about the activity. It gives them information about how the activity is going to happen so that they've got all the information they need to make a decision about approving the activity. It also provides information for those staff who are running the activity so they know what's happening. It also means that if there is an emergency, all this information is in one place. So sometimes when there's an emergency, you get a little bit panicked, you can't always think straight. And so by having everything in the one place, it means you can pick it up and have all the information you need. And I've just seen Tasha's hand up. Tash, did you have a question?
Oh, good. I was just about to ask that. Why do we have that? Sorry.
Okay, did that answer the question for you?
Totally.
Perfect. Awesome. So there's all different information. So we've got this, what's the name of the program? So I've just put Y Central Program, but you might be putting Y Central Holiday Program or Youth Service, Respite Camp, whatever your program is. Then there's the date of the activity, and that could be a single date because you're running a one-off activity, or it might be a period because you might be running, say, a term activity and it's running for that whole period of that term, or a holiday program or vice versa. Then it's got the information around who completed the activity management plan. We've got an activity description, so what's happening in the activity. So when you are writing that, if you're the person who's writing the activity management plan, make it as detailed as possible. And in my example here, we're going to be walking to the supermarket. Then you've got the activity location. And the reason we have that location is, again, like I said, if we have to manage an emergency, someone might actually not know the address, or in a panic, they're not thinking straight, they can't remember the address, but that information is all there on this form at your fingertips. So you can pick it up, you're talking to the 111 operator if you need to, and saying, this is where the emergency is happening. This is the address that you need to come to. So an activity management plan should always be in a really easy to find place, so that it's really easy for any staff on site to be able to pick it up and go with it. There's also examples there around, where is water? Is there water on site? Do participants need to bring drink bottles? So that you can plan, do we need to take emergency supplies of water where we're going? Toilets, where do we find the toilets? In this case, I've put that there's male and female toilets on site, but that helps us to plan what we might need to take with us. If we were going out in the bush, for example, do we need to take supplies with us? The next one is permissions required. So is there any permissions required for the participants for this activity? In some cases, there might not be any permissions, and so that would be an NA, or not applicable, but you may have permissions. So for example, in this activity, we're walking to the supermarket. So that means we are leaving our site, we're going off-site and on an excursion. So if I was working with young people under the age of 18, I then need to get permissions from parents and guardians for them to be able to do that excursion. And different programs will get that permission in a different way. If it might be on your registration form, as an example, Y Kids, when parents sign up to a holiday program, that permission is given when they agree to the terms and conditions. You might be doing an activity that involves photography or videography, so you might need to get permission to take photos and videos. Or if you are doing something to do with publicity, you might need to get them to sign in a form to agree that their photos can go on the website. There's all different permissions that you might need from the participants doing that activity, and that information goes in there. If you are going to an external provider, they might require a waiver to be signed. So you might put in there that there's a waiver to be signed by that external provider. And while we're just talking about external providers, just a little caveat, we don't do activity management plans for an external provider. The external provider has their own activity management plans risk management system. We are not experienced in their venue or their activity, so we don't do the activity management plans. We do an activity management plan for how we're going to manage our program and our participants in their environment. So for example, if we were going to rock climbing, we're not experts in that venue, what their maintenance schedule is, anything like that. We would do an activity management plan for how we're going to manage our participants in that external environment. And we would ask them to provide their risk management forms, and we would put in our AMPs to refer to the rules, to the risk management strategies of that external provider. So that was just kind of a side note around external providers, but there might be a number of different permissions needed when you're doing an activity management plan. The next one down is an instructor's requirement. So what requirements do an instructor or staff or a leader who is working on this activity need? Now, of course, all staff members who work across the Y, whether they're working with adults, children, or young people, have to be trained in safeguarding. That's a requirement. They also need to be trained in health and safety. So to have done their site induction, know things like where the evacuation points and so on. But there also might be other requirements. If you're working with children and young people, behaviour management is a requirement. If I'm walking down to the supermarket, I need staff that can manage small groups. If we were doing a water activity, we might need to have instructors who know how to swim, because they need to be able to swim to run that activity. If we're doing woodworking, for example, we might need to have instructors who have knowledge of using the woodworking tools. So if there's any requirements for the staff that are doing the activity, it goes into that bit there. Beside that, you'll see it says SOP required. So SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedure. So that might be that there's a standard operating procedure for the activity you're going to do. Also included in there is policies and procedures. So for example, here we're going to walk to the supermarket. So we're transporting people. So the policy that would connect with this is the transport policy. So staff would need to know about the transport policy, but you might be putting up a bouncer castle and there's a standard operating procedure for how that bouncer castle is used. So that information is put in there. If you were going swimming, you'd refer to the pool policy and so on. Below that, you've got participant competencies. So is there anything that the participants need to be competent in order to do this activity? For example, if we were going to go surfing at Tatahi Bay, we need to have a particular level of swimmability with the participants. So that would be putting in there. Is there an age restriction? What competencies do our participants need to have in order to do this activity? Then you have a number of people participating. Now, if you're writing an activity management plan, you might be writing it prior to knowing how many people you've got participating. So you can write and plan your activity, get it approved, and then you might open your bookings and you can put your numbers in there afterwards so you know how many people you're going to have participating in your activity. There's also a bit there around child and staff ratios. So not all programs need ratios. So if you're not a ratioed program, then you would put not applicable in there. And different programs have different requirements for ratios. So for example, if you are an OSCAR program and you're on site, your ratio would be 1 adult to 10 children, as opposed to if you're going off site where it's 1 to 8 or swimming is 1 to 6. If you're a youth services program, your ratios under MSD would be different again. Or if you're a Ministry of Education program, then your MRE ratios are different. So you just include in there what your ratios are. Then you've got your communications, your name and number. So who's the main contact person on site and what's the phone number? Again, that's for an emergency. You know what the main phone number is. Names, either staff and volunteers, who's going to be on site. And again, just like the number of people participating, you don't always know exactly who your staff and volunteers are going to be on the day. So that can be added after your activity management plan has been approved. Then you've also got in there, who's your designated first aider? And that's so everybody knows who the first aider is, who's got the first aid certificate, who do we go to when we need some first aid? The next question down there is, does the activity involve water? So I'm got to know there because I'm not going to water, but if you are going to the river, the beach, the pool, then yes, you've got water. And you need to have a swimming competency and water competence register complete. So what that means essentially is, have you collected information on your participants' swimmability? And different programs will collect this in a different way. If you are a Y Kids program, on Pizzazz, when parents register for holiday program after school care holiday camps, then they will put in there what the swimming ability is. So you'll know if your children are beginner, if they're moderate and advanced. Then on the right, it asks about what staff have appropriate risk assessment experience or are trained in shallow pool recovery or lifeguard trained. So you just put information in there. So if you're going to an external pool, there'll be lifeguards there. So you make a note of that. You might be going to the beach and there's surf lifesavers there, or you're going to do an activity, you use an external provider and they've got trained staff. So that information is all put in there. But if you're going on a school site, there's no lifeguards there, then you will put in there what staff you've got. You might have staff that are trained as lifeguards, or you might be getting someone else to come in that is lifeguard trained, or they're doing swim instructing, or there's staff across the organisation who have training in pool safety. And there's a number of staff who have done that pool safety training and it is available. So if you are running a program and you have an interest in getting staff trained in pool safety, have a chat to me and we can get that done. And that information goes in there. So we know who has got the lifeguard experiences, that we've got the right people doing the right things. So that's all the information that we collect in that first part of the activity management plan. And I'm just going to stop there because I know it was a lot of information. Did anyone have any burning questions at the moment? No? No burning questions? Awesome. Now, this is the second page of the activity management plan. So we've put all the information in that top part. We've had the meaty bit where we've identified risks and hazards. We've put our management strategies in. And then we have this page. Now, this page, where the red bit is, we can put in photos. So this gives us context for all the wording that was on the previous page. And what we want to do is we want everybody who's managing an activity to be able to understand the AMPs, to know what the hazards and risks are and how to manage them. But not everybody learns through reading. You know, sometimes reading a lot of text can be overwhelming. So photos help to give knowledge to those people who might be visual learners and also add a little bit more context. So for example, you might be talking about out of bounds areas in the previous section, and then you might put a map of where the out of bounds areas are to give a little bit more context to it. Also on this page is where you put your emergency plan, and it's an activity specific emergency plan. Because your emergency plan when you're on site might be completely different for an emergency plan when you're off site or when you're doing a different activity. So the emergency plan will be specific to the activity you're doing. And then on this page, there's also the sections for where the AMP is approved and where it's reviewed when we do continuous improvement. And we'll talk about the signing off and the approval a little bit further on. And then the last page on the activity management plan is for staff to sign off. So all staff and volunteers are given the chance to read through an activity management plan and sign that they have read and understood. So there's space for the name, contact details, signature, and then the date that they signed it. And you might ask why we need contact details. And in some cases we don't. If you are doing an activity on site and everyone's all together, you don't need contact details. But if I'm walking to the supermarket and I've divided into groups and there's a couple of leaders with each group, but we're walking separately, we'll need contact details for each of those groups so that if something happens, we've got the information to be able to contact those groups. So that's why that information is there. So we've gone through the activity management plan and we've gone through the different parts. So now we're going to get into that really meaty stuff. So how do we identify the risks and hazards? How do we put management strategies in place? That sort of thing. So let's go on to that. Now, I really like this target diagram because it helps me to understand risks and hazards and actions to manage. Now, you will have heard me talk about risks and hazards and kind of use them interchangeably, but they are actually slightly different. So when I talk about a risk, I'm talking about an undesired bad thing to avoid if we're running an activity. So what don't we want to happen? Is it a broken bone, sprained ankle, whatever? A hazard is the thing that leads to those undesired bad things. So what is going to cause that risk to happen? Our actions to manage, what can we do to eliminate, so completely remove or to minimize those hazards? And then the emergency response is what actions would we take if bad things did occur? So if something bad has happened, what is our emergency response going to be? So let's have a look at that target diagram again and think about the risks and hazards. So let's look at the risk first. Have a think about, talk in your groups, share it in the chat. What kind of bad things do you not want to happen on your program? Have a think, share in the chat. Or if you want to answer, you can put your hand up, unmute yourself. What things do we not want to happen? What risks might there be on a program? Karen, you look like you want to say something. Oh, you're on mute, Karen.
Sorry. Maybe if you're using scissors or sharp objects, or is that just with regards to the amps?
Yep, scissors and sharp objects. So that would be the hazard. That would be what causes it. So the risk would be a cut, for example, or a stab. But yeah, awesome. And I can see some stuff. People have put missing child. Yes, Seth, something we don't want to happen. Fatalities, cuts, choking, parents coming in and having a go about what is happening. Yes, absolutely. That's something that we don't want to happen. Children going missing. Absolutely. All those things are risks that we don't want happening on our program. Falls from heights, all those sorts of things are risks that we don't want happening. So things like concussion, broken legs, those are all risks that we don't want happening on our program. So then we go further to the yellow section. So that's hazards. Those are the things that cause the risks. So what do you think might be hazards on a program that would cause a concussion or a broken leg? What things might you have that might cause a concussion or a broken leg? And I can see that Pine Haven's put things like sharp objects, anything in the kitchen, wooden bowling balls, bridges, absolutely. If you had a bridge on your playground and they fell off it. Broken equipment in the playground, absolutely. That's why it's really important that we do hazard checks and so on to make sure that we don't have broken equipment. Absolutely. So all those sorts of things. There might be an uneven piece of concrete that someone's going to trip over and break their leg. Or there might be some stairs that people run down and they fall down and hurt themselves. Or there might be a wet floor. Or there might be participants that are not listening to instructions. So hazards can be physical things, but they can also be people as well. So, you know, when we go back, we were talking about competencies. If the people didn't have the correct competencies, that would be a hazard. If we're going for a swimming activity and there are people that can't swim, then that would be a hazard. So now we move out to the green, and this is the actions to manage. So we've talked about there's risks, broken legs, concussion, and they can be caused by things like wet floor, stairs, uneven concrete. How would we manage those hazards to stop that from happening? Have a think about what would we do, what actions would we put in place to stop those, to reduce those hazards, to manage those hazards. Absolutely, someone said no running. So it might be not necessarily be running across the whole program, but no running when you're going down the stairs. Areas, someone said areas like kitchens, staff only, absolutely, because those are the areas that have a lot of those hazards in them. So you might be ensuring that children don't go into the kitchens, or they only go in the kitchens if there's staff there. So if we look, things like remove participants who are not following instructions. So if you've got participants who are continuously not following instruction, not listening, then we might remove them from the activity, put them in a timeout to be able to manage that until they can listen to the instructions. We might do a site check prior to activity and mop up any spills. So that would reduce the wet floor. We might put a sign up reminding participants to walk down the stairs so they're not running down the stairs. If we've got a piece of uneven concrete, we might put a cone over it. So it highlights to the participants there's a piece of uneven concrete there and they can't go over it. So all those actions that we put in place to manage those risks and those hazards. And then, of course, we have an emergency response. And as I said, that emergency response will be specific to the activity. In this case, actually, we're going to remove all the unaffected participants from the area. So anyone that hasn't been injured will be removed out of the area so they can be kept calm. Perform the required first aid, phone 111 and phone your manager on phone number. And it's important to put the phone number there because, again, in an emergency, someone might panic. So having the number there helps them out. It also means that all the information is in the same place. So they're not having to go through their phone or whatever it is to find the number. It's all there. And again, an activity management plan should be readily available for anyone to pick up. So we've talked about risks. We've got concussion, broken leg. the hazards that will cause them, things like wet floor, stairs, participants not listening, and how we're going to manage those. Remove participants who aren't listening, put a cone over the uneven concrete, etc. So now we're going to take these from the target diagram and put it into the activity management plan template. And I can see, Tash, you've just asked me, what does a timeout look like? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
In regards to, I understand what Oscar is timeout, but in regards to youth services, when we deal with, I suppose, police and stuff like that, what's timeout? At that point, you know, when we're going to that point, where do we do the timeout?
So timeouts, that was just one word I used, but that could be that you're excluding someone from the program because it's got to a point that actually it's too dangerous to have them, or they're stood down for
Okay, so
that day.
but if you have a scenario where you have an incident where there's havoc, you know, within your group, when do you call that timeout and just say enough's enough? Is it about, I mean, I know what it is. It's about, you know, protecting staff, protecting, you know, everyone and the children. But yeah, timeout. What,
Yeah.
you know, trying to, yeah, ascertain.
So it's at a point where it's not a manageable situation. So if
Okay.
you've got to a point where it's all havoc, I would say you're already in your emergency response. It's prior to it getting to that emergency. And I know for youth services where those kids are older, a timeout is completely different. So there'd be different
Yeah.
wording to what it looks like.
No, I understand. And I put that to, you know, what we deal with. So thank you, Amy. That,
Cool.
Yep, explained everything. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so we want to take these and we want to put them into the activity management plan. So this is the meaty part of the activity management plan. So we've got our hazards and risks on the left side, and you'll see they're divided into site-specific and activity-specific. So site-specific, as it says, is hazards or risks that are specific to your site. So you might have a particular building or a set of stairs or something on your site that's a hazard. An activity is specific hazard and risk is a hazard or risk that's specific to the activity you're doing. And so that hazard or risk stays with that activity, even if you were to move it to a different site. So for example, if you were playing soccer, just to be very simplistic, a hazard might be that a ball's going to hit somebody in the face. Now, no matter what site you play that soccer on, that hazard will still be there. So it's a hazard that's specific to the activity, as opposed to a hazard that's specific just to a site. So let's take some of the information we talked about and put it in this form. So first of all, we'll put in the hazards and risks. So a broken bone from participants slipping on the wet floor. So the broken bone is the risk, the thing we don't want happening, and the hazard is the wet floor. So they're going to get that broken bone from slipping on the wet floor. Then we put in our severity and potential. So we've looked at our severity levels. I've said if it was to happen, it's about a 6, and our potential M, medium chance of it happening. So how are we going to manage that? We're going to complete a site check prior to the activity commencing and ensure all spills are mopped up before starting activity. So that's how we're going to manage it. And the result is that we have minimized that hazard. And why have we minimized it? You could say we've eliminated because we've mopped up all the water, but there is a risk of spills happening again. If kids are running around with drink bottles or they've got food, they might spill something out and that spills there. So then we can add other management strategies in. So we might say, if we're playing a sport, drink bottles aren't allowed onto the court. So there's no risk of a drink bottle leaking onto the court, and adding in those other managements of those hazards and risks. And we'll add our second hazard risk in. So broken bone, which is again the risk from tripping over broken concrete. So you have a piece of broken concrete, someone's tripped over and broken a bone. Now I've put the severity for that as 6, but I've put a low potential. And of course you'll use that key. Sometimes that's a little bit personal, what you think. So I might put it as a 6 an L, someone else might put it as a level 4, but medium. So you just use that based on that severity scale. Now, what's our management strategy? We're going to put a cone over the uneven concrete. So that cone will highlight where the piece of broken concrete is and keep people away from it. So again, we've minimised that hazard. We haven't completely eliminated it. If we were to get a caretaker to come in, take away the concrete and pour a new piece, we would have eliminated it. We've minimised it because it's still there, but we've minimised the severity of it. Okay, then we can add things into the next part of the AMP. So we might add in a photo given context. So here you can see it's not a very good picture, but in the top, there's a little bit of damaged concrete. So that's that concrete that we don't want kids tripping over. So I've put a note there. There's a crack in the concrete by the hopscotch, put a cone over it. So this is where you can put those photos in to add context to the words. Because if in the main media piece, if I say, there's a crack in the concrete by the junior playground, as an example, you might not be sure exactly where I'm referring to, but if I put a photo in, you can see exactly where it is. If we're talking about out of bounds areas, you could put a map of where the out of bounds areas are and so on. And those photos, just to help give a visual and add context to the words. Because as I said previously, we want all staff to be able to understand the AMPs and understand how to manage those risks and hazards. So by having visuals in there, it makes sure that we are hitting all the different learning styles. You'd also put in your activity-specific emergency plan. So I've put in my emergency plan. Remove all unaffected participants, perform required first aid, phone 111 and phone your manager. And again, that emergency plan is specific to your activity. So there will be similarities, but there will be differences based on your activity as well. And then down the bottom is where the person who is approving the activity management plan writes their signature. And then there's also the signature for when we review it. Tash, I can see your hand up as well. Did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry.
That's
Just in
right.
regards to the activity, specific emergency plan, would you not put your manager and their phone number and CEO, and also in regards to making sure that we're not, say, for example, someone comes in from a political side and sees it and takes photos?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking me in terms of the
Well,
political side.
So would you make sure that we don't speak to the media?
Absolutely. So when there's an emergency, we do have a crisis policy and media policy. So no one speaks to the media unless it's a CEO.
So would that not be in that point of call right there?
Absolutely, we can put that in there.
Cool. Thank you.
But for your average staff person on the ground, they're dealing with the main emergency. They would then phone their manager.
Yeah.
And their manager
Understand,
would
yeah.
then talk to the CEO.
Totally understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
With me, Amy, it's a bit different. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally
So
understand.
it depends on your
Thank you.
level
Yeah.
within the
Thanks.
organisation. So if you were reporting directly to the CEO, then you'd have that in your emergency plan. So again, it depends on your business unit, where you are in the organisation, and what the activity is you're doing. Hopefully that helps and clears that up. So down the bottom is where we have the signature bits for the person who's approving the activity management plan, and where we have a signature for when their plans are reviewed. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about getting activity management plans approved and the continuous improvement in reviewing of them. So activity management plans must be approved by a 1-up. So if you are a staff member on a site and you are writing an activity management plan for an activity you are organising, then your manager must sign it. If you're a centre manager, then your manager 1-up must read through and approve it. And did I hear someone just asking a question just then? No. So it must be approved by a 1-up. And an activity management plan must be approved prior to an activity taking place. So when you get your activity management plan written, you need to send it through to your one-up, to your manager, for them to approve prior to your activity taking place. And we want to give managers enough time as possible to be able to review and sign off that activity management plan. So as a minimum, you want 2 weeks prior to the activity. If you can give more time, that's better, but 2 weeks. And that gives time for a person to look through the activity management plan, to read through, and they may come back to you and query some things, or they may ask you to change things, and that gives time for that process to happen before an activity takes place. So you must get those activity management plans signed off prior to those activities taking place. Now, it's also really important that we are reviewing activity management plans all the time as well. So these are living documents. You're not just writing an activity management plan, throwing it into a folder and never looking at it again. We need to be constantly reviewing and updating and looking at them. So when you're running activity, as I said previously, they always need to be there, easily available for you to grab. So must be reviewed and updated at the start of each program. So if you were running a term-based program, you would do it at the start of each term. Or if it's a holiday-based program, it'd be the start of each holidays. Whenever the start of your program is, that AMP must be reviewed and updated. Also, when you find a new risk or hazard. So you may have updated your AMP at the start of the term, but then a new risk or a new hazard has been found. So you update your activity management plan to include that new risk or that new hazard. And also, if something changes in your activity or on site, so all of a sudden you've got a new building going up on your site, you've got construction that's changed to your site, you need to update your activity management plan to reflect that, because we always need to know what the hazards and risks are on site and how we're going to manage them. And of course, if you're starting a brand new activity that you've not done before, then you're going to be writing a new activity management plan for that activity. So once an activity management plan has been approved, we then need to make sure that all staff understand the activity management plan. And this is when it comes to signing it off. So all staff and volunteers who are going to be on site and involved in activity must have read and understood the AMPs and sign them off. So if you're a staff member working on a program, you need to see an activity management plan prior to doing that activity, and you need to have understood it and signed it off. Now, it's really important that you do not sign an activity management plan if you A, don't agree with it, or if you don't understand the activity management plan. Now, that's really important, because as soon as you sign it, you're signing that you've agreed to the activity management plan and you're going to follow the management strategies. If something then happens on a program and you haven't followed the management strategies, that's when you can get yourself in trouble. So for those of you who've done my health and safety training, you'll remember that under the Health and Safety at Work Act, we can be personally liable. We can be fined if we haven't followed health and safety instruction, followed the rules. And if we've said that we agree and then we don't follow those management strategies and WorkSafe comes on to investigate, that's where we can get ourselves in trouble. So we need to make sure that we understand what it is that we're reading and signing and that we agree with it. So if you're reading through an activity management plan and you think, actually, this doesn't address the hazards and risks that I know are on site, or doesn't address them in a way that I think they should be, talk to your manager, talk to your colleagues, talk about it, say, hey, this is how I think we should do it, have those conversations. If you don't understand what that activity management plan says, ask. Get your manager, get your colleagues to explain it, so you understand how you're going to manage those hazards and those risks when you're on site, when you're managing an activity. And that's really important. And it's really important that you as staff are given time to really read through activity management plans and understand them. So you shouldn't just have your activity management plan thrown at you 2 minutes before you're starting activity. You should be given time to read through and sign. So ideally, prior to a program starting, there should be time where you're briefed, you have the opportunity to sit down, read through, ask questions before you sign it off. And health and safety is everybody's responsibility. So if you haven't seen AMPS on site, it's your responsibility to ask. If you're going to a new site you haven't worked at before, ask, hey, I need to see the activity management plan so I can understand what's the hazard and risks on site and how to manage them. Because we want everybody to go home safe. We want to have safe programs so everyone has fun and goes home safe at the end of the day. And we all have responsibility for that. So if you're the person who's writing the activity management plans, you're making sure that you give your staff enough time to read through and understand. And if you're a staff member who is signing an activity management plan, make sure you understand it and you agree with it before you sign it. So on that note, that brings us to the end of activity management plans. So we talked about the different components, what goes into an activity management plan, how to identify hazards and risks and how to manage them, and then how to put all the information into an activity management plan. Close up with our karakia. So tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te haere tangata, ka runga te pō, ka runga te ao, haumie, hui e, tai ki e.